This is the story of a doctor in a death camp. He was forced to assist in horrific experiments. But secretly, he was diluting poisons, faking records, and fighting a one-man war to cheat the gas chambers. His name was Dr. Stanislaw Klodzinski, and his story begins not in Auschwitz, but in the bustling, pre-war streets of Krakow, Poland. Klodzinski was a young, promising physician, a 1934 graduate of the prestigious Jagiellonian University. He specialized in pulmonology, the study of lung diseases. He worked at a clinic, treating patients with tuberculosis and other serious illnesses. He was known for his sharp mind and his deep compassion. He embodied the Hippocratic Oath, the sacred promise to do no harm. His future was bright, filled with the promise of healing and discovery. Then, on September 1st, 1939, his world was shattered. Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The war began with a terrifying blitzkrieg of bombs and tanks. Krakow, his beloved city, was captured within a week. It became the capital of the German general government. The Nazis immediately began their reign of terror. They systematically targeted Polish intellectuals. Doctors, professors, artists, and scientists were arrested. This was a plan called Sonderaktion Krakow, a deliberate effort to destroy Polish culture and leadership. Faced with this brutality, Dr. Klodzinski refused to stand by. He joined the Polish resistance, specifically the Związek Walki Zbrojnych, or the Union of Armed Struggle. This was a secret underground army. He did not fight with a gun, but with his medical skills. In hidden clinics and private apartments, he treated wounded resistance fighters. He used his position to forge medical documents, creating fake health certificates to save people from forced labor, or from deportation to concentration camps. He provided aid and medicine under the very noses of the occupiers. He knew the risks were enormous. Discovery by the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, meant certain death. For 2 years, he operated in the shadows, saving lives. But the Gestapo's network of informants was everywhere. Eventually, in 1941, Klodzinski's luck ran out. He was arrested. His crime: conspiracy against the Third Reich. His sentence was not a swift execution. It was deportation to a place worse than death: Auschwitz. He was packed into a cramped, suffocating cattle car, with dozens of other prisoners, given no food or water for the long journey. The darkness was filled with fear and despair. When the train finally screeched to a halt, the doors were thrown open to reveal a scene of organized hell. SS guards with snarling dogs, shouting orders in German. The infamous Arbeit macht frei Gate, meaning work sets you free. A cynical lie that hung over the entrance to the death camp. Klodzinski was shoved onto the platform, into the chaos of selection. He witnessed families being torn apart, the old and the weak sent in one direction, the young and the strong sent in another. He was stripped of his identity, his clothes, his name, his dignity, all taken from him. His head was shaved. He was given a striped prison uniform. A number was tattooed onto his left forearm. He was no longer Dr. Stanislaw Klodzinski. He was prisoner number 19808. He saw things that would forever haunt his soul. The starvation that turned men into walking skeletons. The random, casual beatings by the guards. And the crematoria chimneys, belching thick, black smoke day and night. He watched as his fellow prisoners, doctors and professors among them, succumbed to disease, exhaustion, or the arbitrary cruelty of the camp. He believed he would soon be one of them. But his past was about to become his only key to survival. The SS, despite running a death camp, had a constant, desperate need for medical personnel. When they discovered that prisoner 19808 was a skilled doctor, they assigned him to the camp infirmary. It was known as the Krankenbau, located in the dreaded Block 20. This was not a place of healing. It was a waiting room for death. And it was here, in the dark heart of Auschwitz, that Dr. Klodzinski would begin his secret war. Dr. Klodzinski was now a prisoner doctor in the Auschwitz infirmary. The Krankenbau. This was not a hospital in any true sense of the word. It was a place where the sick were sent to die. The barracks, known as Block 20, were filthy and overcrowded. 3 or 4 sick men were often crammed onto a single lice-infested bunk. There were almost no real medicines. Paper bandages were used to cover horrific wounds, and diseases like typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis spread like wildfire. The air was thick with the smell of sickness and death. Overseeing this realm of horror were the SS doctors, Men like Friedrich Interest and Helmuth Vetter. They were not healers. They were killers in white coats. They held the absolute power of life and death. They would walk through the barracks, conducting selections. A simple flick of their finger could send a man to the gas chamber. Any prisoner deemed too sick to work was condemned. The infirmary was just an organized way to manage the dying. Klodzinski's official duties were a waking nightmare. He was forced to assist these SS doctors. He had to prepare patients for their barbaric experiments and record the horrifying results. He had to stand by during the selections, watching as hundreds of men were sentenced to death with a casual gesture. His medical knowledge was being twisted, used not to save lives, but to facilitate murder on an industrial scale. Every day, he walked a razor's edge. A single wrong word, a look of defiance, could get him killed. He had to appear compliant, to be a good prisoner, to be a useful cog in the death machine. He saw the utter despair in the eyes of his fellow prisoners. Men who had once been doctors, lawyers, and professors themselves, now reduced to starving, skeletal figures, pleading for help that he was powerless to openly give. The weight of his oath to do no harm was a constant torment. He was in a place where harm was the only purpose. He saw the depths of human cruelty, but he also saw flickers of incredible courage. Prisoners sharing a stolen crust of bread, a quiet word of comfort whispered in the dark, small acts of humanity in a place designed to destroy it. But in a place designed to extinguish hope, a flicker of defiance refused to die. Dr. Klodzinski made a choice. He would not be a passive victim. He would not be a compliant tool for the Nazis. He would fight back, not with a weapon, but with his mind, with his medical knowledge. His war would be a secret one, fought in the shadows of the infirmary, a silent, desperate struggle for life. It began with the smallest acts of sabotage. He started by falsifying medical records. He would change a diagnosis on a patient's chart, making a man with a deadly fever appear to have a minor cold. This simple lie could be the difference between life and death. It could spare a man from the dreaded selection. He would secretly swap test tube samples, contaminating the SS doctors' research, rendering their sadistic experiments useless. These were small victories, tiny acts of rebellion in the face of overwhelming evil. But for Dr. Klodzinski, they were a start. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a saboteur. Dr. Klodzinski's secret war in the infirmary began to expand. He realized he could not fight alone. He needed allies, trusted individuals who shared his defiance. He found them among the other prisoner doctors and medical staff. Men like Dr. Tadeusz Orszakowski and Dr. Zdzisław Ryn. They were Polish doctors, also prisoners, who hated the Nazis. They formed a clandestine network within Block 20, a secret society of healers fighting against death. Their most crucial weapon was information. Klodzinski meticulously documented the atrocities he witnessed. He knew that simply surviving wasn't enough. The world had to know what was happening inside Auschwitz. He kept a secret diary, a chilling record of Nazi crimes. He often wrote on scraps of paper, sometimes on stolen SS forms, risking everything for a few lines. He hid these precious documents in the walls of the infirmary, concealed in cracks or beneath loose floorboards. He compiled detailed lists of the SS doctors, their names, their ranks, and the specifics of their horrific experiments. These documents, if discovered, would mean instant death, not just for him, but for anyone associated with him. But he believed the truth was worth the ultimate risk. He provided vital intelligence to the Polish underground resistance, risking everything to ensure the outside world knew the truth of Auschwitz. This information was smuggled out of the camp by various means. Sometimes, it was hidden in the clothes of prisoners being transferred. Other times, by civilian workers who had limited access to the camp. Klodzinski was instrumental in exposing the terrible effects of Joseph Mengel's experiments. Mengel, known as the Angel of Death, was perhaps the most infamous SS doctor. He conducted unspeakable experiments, especially on twins. He injected them with chemicals, performed unnecessary surgeries, and often murdered them to dissect their organs. Klodzinski's detailed observations provided crucial evidence against Mengel. He secretly treated dying resistance members within the infirmary, trying to keep them alive long enough to transmit vital intelligence. He used his medical knowledge to hide their symptoms, to make them appear less ill to the SS doctors. He also expanded his network to help prisoners beyond Block 20. He established secret communication with other resistance cells, working with groups that smuggled food and messages. He became a vital link in the camp's underground, and that's when the resistance truly began to take root. One of his most dangerous acts involved typhus. Typhus was a deadly disease, highly contagious, but it also had a strange use in Auschwitz. Some prisoners, with a fever, could avoid heavy labor. Klodzinski and his network found a way to infect healthy prisoners, not with the deadly typhus bacterium, but with a less dangerous substance that mimicked its symptoms. They would inject prisoners with a weak solution, causing a temporary fever and rash, making them appear gravely ill, but not contagious. This allowed these prisoners to be sent to the infirmary, where they were safe from hard labor and immediate selection. It bought them precious time, a chance to regain strength. It was a dangerous gamble, as a false diagnosis could be fatal, but it saved countless lives from brutal work details. He saved lives often by simply giving a sliver of hope, a knowing glance, a gentle touch in a place devoid of all humanity, a kind word in Polish, a reassurance that they were not forgotten. These small acts of compassion were just as powerful as his medical sabotage. For a prisoner in Auschwitz, a moment of human dignity was a lifeline. Dr. Klodzinski was a beacon of light in the darkest of places, a symbol of defiance against overwhelming evil. His secret war continued, day after agonizing day, always knowing that discovery meant instant death. Dr. Klodzinski's secret activities within Block 20 grew bolder. His daily life was a dangerous performance, playing the compliant prisoner doctor for the SS, while simultaneously working to undermine their goals. One of his most dangerous challenges was the pseudoscientific research of the SS. They performed barbaric experiments, designed not to cure, but to prove Nazi racial theories, or to test the limits of human endurance to torture. Klodzinski was often forced to assist these experiments. He had to observe, record, and sometimes even physically participate. He witnessed prisoners injected with typhus. Others were given malaria or other deadly diseases, simply to observe their agonizing decline and death. He saw the horrific effects of sterilizations, performed on countless men and women, forced on them to prevent future generations of undesirables. He knew if he resisted too openly, he would be next. His knowledge of medicine was a double-edged sword. It made him valuable to the SS, but it also forced him to witness unspeakable acts. Yet, this dark access also gave him opportunity. He continued to dilute lethal injections meant for prisoners. These injections were often a quick way to liquidate the sick. Klodzinski would secretly replace parts of the poison with saline solution, buying prisoners precious hours, sometimes days, of life. A small window of time for a miracle, or a chance for the underground to help them. He would also diagnose prisoners with fake illnesses, not just typhus, but other non-existent conditions. This would get them admitted to the infirmary, where they were safer from brutal labor, and could receive secret care from his network. He knew a select group of trusted prisoner doctors and nurses. Together, they formed a strong clandestine network within Block 20. They smuggled information, shared what meager medicines they could find, and created underground resistance cells within the infirmary itself. They also developed a system for communicating with the outside world, through carefully coded messages and desperate couriers. These messages contained vital intelligence, details about transports, new gas chambers, and the numbers of dead. Klodzinski's meticulous documentation was critical for this. His secret diary became an indispensable record. He documented the exact nature of the SS experiments, the names of the victims, when he could get them, and the identities of the SS perpetrators. This was intelligence the Polish underground desperately needed. It allowed them to warn London and the Allied forces, painting a clearer, more horrifying picture of Auschwitz. He was instrumental in exposing the terrible effects of Joseph Mengel's experiments on twins. Mengel's notorious reputation as the Angel of Death was built on these atrocities. Klodzinski's records provided crucial details. Even small acts made a difference. He secretly treated dying resistance members within the infirmary, trying to keep them alive long enough to transmit vital intelligence. He used his medical knowledge to hide their true symptoms from the SS. This was a daily, silent battle for survival, and for the very soul of humanity itself. Dr. Klodzinski and his clandestine network faced constant, evolving threats. The SS doctors, though cruel, were not entirely oblivious. They grew suspicious of the low death rates in some infirmary blocks, or the unusual diagnoses appearing on patient charts. This forced Klodzinski and his team to become even more ingenious. They developed new codes for their false diagnoses, creating elaborate backstories for why a prisoner appeared ill. They moved prisoners between blocks to avoid suspicion, disguising their acts of sabotage as mere medical incompetence. The stakes were always life or death. One of their most daring acts was the creation of a fake typhus epidemic. Typhus was a deadly disease, but it had a strange use in Auschwitz. When a real epidemic broke out, the SS often quarantined entire blocks. This temporarily halted selections for the gas chambers. It also stopped the brutal daily work details. Klodzinski and his network found a way to mimic typhus symptoms. They would use weak, non-lethal solutions, injecting healthy prisoners with substances that caused a temporary fever and a telltale skin rash. This allowed these prisoners to be sent to the infirmary, where they were diagnosed with contagious typhus. They were then moved to a special quarantine barracks, safe from selections and forced labor for several weeks. It bought them precious time to regain strength, heal wounds, and receive secret care. It was a dangerous gamble. A false diagnosis could mean immediate execution, but it saved countless lives from brutal work details and from the gas chambers. Klodzinski also focused on the camp's nutrition or lack thereof. Starvation was a primary killer in Auschwitz. Prisoners received barely enough calories to survive. Klodzinski knew that even small amounts of extra food could make a difference. He established secret connections with other resistance cells, working with groups of prisoners assigned to the kitchens and those who worked in the warehouses. They would smuggle scraps of food, potato peels, or small pieces of bread. These meager provisions were distributed in the infirmary, often hidden in medicine trays or under bandages. A single extra crust of bread could prevent a man from becoming a Musulman, the term for a prisoner so emaciated they were near death, and therefore destined for selection. These acts of compassion were just as vital as his medical sabotage. For a prisoner in Auschwitz, a moment of human dignity was a lifeline, a kind word, a reassurance that they were not forgotten. In a place designed to strip away all humanity, Dr. Klodzinski was a beacon of light, a symbol of defiance against overwhelming evil. His secret war continued, day after agonizing day, always knowing that discovery meant instant death. Dr. Klodzinski's daily life was a dangerous performance. He had to maintain a facade of detached professionalism for the SS, all while his heart broke for the suffering men and women around him. The constant fear of discovery was a suffocating weight. A single slip-up, a misplaced document, a suspicious glance from an SS guard could mean the end for him and his entire network. He carried the heavy burden of deciding who he could try to save and who was beyond his help, already too far gone. The guilt over those he couldn't save was a constant companion. He worked alongside other courageous prisoner doctors, men like Dr. Władysław Deering, a skilled surgeon from Warsaw, and Dr. Janusz Majanowski, another resistance member. Together, they created a chain of trust within the infirmary. They communicated in coded language and knowing glances, sharing what meager medicines they could find. A stolen vial of aspirin was as precious as gold. A single syringe, hidden from the SS, was a lifeline. Their network extended beyond the infirmary walls. They had contacts in the Canada Commando. This was the group of prisoners forced to sort the belongings of murdered Jews. These contacts would sometimes smuggle medicine, bandages, or even scraps of food, hidden inside loaves of bread or hollowed-out potatoes. It was a desperate, high-stakes supply chain, but it provided Klodzinski's team with vital tools for their work. Hope was another form of medicine they prescribed. The resistance had built a secret radio receiver inside the camp. This was an incredible feat, risking instant execution if caught. At great risk, they would listen to Allied broadcasts, learning the truth about the progress of the war. This news was then spread secretly throughout the camp, whispered from one prisoner to another in the barracks. A rumor of a victory on the Eastern Front, a successful bombing raid over Germany. These small pieces of good news were a powerful antidote to despair. They reminded the prisoners that they were not forgotten, and that the Third Reich was not invincible. For Klodzinski, this information was crucial. It fueled his determination to keep his documentation safe. He knew that one day, the war would end, and the world would need to hear the truth. His secret diary grew, filled with names, dates, and horrific details. He was building a case against his captors. One page, one hidden note at a time, he meticulously recorded the crimes. His life settled into a grim, dangerous routine, saving who he could, documenting what he saw, surviving one day at a time, always pushing back against the darkness. Then, in May of 1943, the nature of the horror in Auschwitz changed. It became more focused, more perverse, driven by a new kind of evil. And that's when a new monster arrived. A young, ambitious SS doctor with a chilling obsession for scientific research. His name was Joseph Mengele. He would become known to the world as the Angel of Death. Mengele's arrival marked a new, even darker chapter for the Krankenbau. His focus was on twisted genetic experiments. He had a particular fascination with twins, dwarfs, and people with physical abnormalities. He would use the infirmary as his personal laboratory, performing horrific, unnecessary surgeries, injecting chemicals into eyes to try and change their color, and often murdering his subjects to dissect their organs. For Dr. Klodzinski, the secret war was about to become even more dangerous. He was now in the direct orbit of the camp's most infamous perpetrator. Mengele's presence meant the frequency and barbarity of experiments would increase, and the stakes for Klodzinski's resistance would skyrocket. He knew he would be forced to witness even greater atrocities and find even more ingenious ways to subvert the SS. Survival would now depend on an even finer balance of compliance and defiance. The arrival of Joseph Mengele in 1943 cast a long, chilling shadow over Auschwitz. For Dr. Klodzinski, Mengele's presence meant a new level of horror. Mengele was charming, intelligent, and utterly devoid of empathy. He saw the prisoners not as human beings, but as experimental subjects. He had a particular obsession with twins. He believed studying them would unlock secrets of genetic inheritance. He would separate twins from their families on arrival, giving them better food and clothes, creating a false sense of security, only to subject them to unspeakable torments. Klodzinski, assigned to the infirmary, was now in Mengele's direct orbit. He was forced to witness these vile experiments. He saw Mengele inject chemicals into twins' eyes, attempting to change their color to Aryan blue. He observed transfusions between twins, infections with diseases, and the meticulous measurement of every bodily function. Mengele's ultimate goal was often murder. He would kill one twin to perform a comparative autopsy with the survivor. Klodzinski's secret diary now began to fill with Mengele's name. He meticulously recorded the details of these scientific crimes, the names of the twins, their numbers, the dates of the experiments, and the horrifying outcomes. This documentation was incredibly dangerous. Mengele was powerful, paranoid, and had no hesitation in executing anyone. But Klodzinski knew that exposing Mengele was critical. His records would later become vital evidence against the Angel of Death. Despite the intensified danger, Klodzinski found new ways to resist. He worked with other prisoner doctors, especially those in Block 10. This block was specifically used for sterilization experiments on women. He provided coded warnings to new arrivals about Mengele, advising them on how to avoid his attention, if possible, or how to fake illnesses to escape his selection. He learned to recognize Mengele's patterns, his whims, his preferences for certain types of subjects. This knowledge was shared within the underground network. It allowed some prisoners to make themselves less interesting to the SS doctor. Klodzinski's medical expertise became even more critical for the resistance. He was often asked to treat dying resistance members, those who had been tortured or brutally beaten by the Gestapo. He would use his knowledge to stabilize them, to keep them alive just long enough to pass on vital intelligence. He hid their true conditions from the SS doctors during their rounds, claiming they had minor, non-contagious ailments. This deception was a constant, terrifying gamble. But the information these resistance members carried was invaluable. It was transmitted through a complex network of couriers, eventually making its way to the Polish underground outside the camp, and from there, sometimes, to the Western Allies. These messages painted a horrifying picture of the camp's true purpose, giving the outside world a glimpse into the ongoing genocide. Klodzinski also continued his personal acts of defiance. He would seek out prisoners, especially those in despair. He would offer them a sliver of hope, a kind word, A gentle touch, a knowing glance. These small acts of human kindness were revolutionary in Auschwitz. They reminded prisoners of their humanity, that they were not just numbers or experimental subjects. This subtle resistance, combined with his medical sabotage, was Dr. Klodzinski's silent war against the SS. He moved through the camp, a ghost of defiance, always aware that Mengel's shadow loomed large, and that the camp's machines of death continued their grim work day and night. By late 1944, the atmosphere in Auschwitz began to change. The tide of the war had turned decisively against Nazi Germany. The Soviet Red Army was advancing relentlessly from the east, while the Western Allies were pushing through France after D-Day. Even in the isolated hell of the camp, news of the outside world filtered through. The secret radios of the resistance brought whispers of German defeats. This created a strange, terrifying mix of hope and dread among the prisoners. Hope that liberation was finally coming. Dread that the SS would try to murder them all before it arrived. For the SS guards and doctors, the mood shifted to panic and paranoia. Their arrogance was replaced by a frantic need to cover their tracks. The systematic extermination process was accelerated. The gas chambers and crematoria of Birkenau worked around the clock. This was the peak of the Hungarian Jewish genocide. Hundreds of thousands were murdered in just a few short months. For Dr. Klodzinski, this period was the epitome of horror. The infirmary was overflowing with the dying, but his mission to document the crimes became more urgent than ever. He knew the Nazis would try to erase their sins from history. His secret diary was no longer just a record, it was a weapon to be used against them in a future world without them. He and his network worked to consolidate and secure their evidence. They gathered their scraps of paper, their hidden lists, their buried notes. They found new, more secure hiding places for this cache of truth, knowing that if the camp was destroyed, the evidence had to survive. As the Soviet front line drew closer, the SS began their final cover-up in earnest. They received orders from Heinrich Himmler to destroy the evidence of mass murder. Special units of prisoners were forced to dismantle the crematoria, blowing up the buildings that had consumed millions of lives. They dug up mass graves and burned the remaining bodies. In a desperate attempt to hide the scale of their genocide, the SS also began to systematically execute prisoners who knew too much. Members of the Sonderkommando, the prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers, and anyone who had a position of knowledge within the camp's administration. For Klodzinski and the other prisoner doctors, this was a time of extreme danger. They were living witnesses to the most intimate details of the Nazi crimes. They knew their lives were now measured in days, perhaps hours. The selections in the infirmary became more frequent and more brutal. The SS wanted to clean out the barracks of anyone who could not walk. Thousands of sick and dying prisoners were murdered in the final weeks. Klodzinski and his team worked frantically. They forged records, hid patients, and did everything in their power to save a few more lives from the final wave of killing. But they were fighting against a tidal wave of death. Then, in mid-January 1945, the final order came. The camp was to be evacuated, but the final act of cruelty was yet to come. The SS would not allow their slave labor force to be liberated. They planned to march the remaining prisoners westward, deeper into Germany. This was the beginning of the infamous death marches. On January 17, 1945, the evacuation of Auschwitz began. Tens of thousands of prisoners, already starved and weak, were forced out of the barracks and into the freezing Polish winter. For Dr. Klodzinski, the secret war inside the infirmary was over. A new, brutal struggle for survival was about to begin. The order to evacuate Auschwitz in January 1945 was a death sentence on foot. In the distance, prisoners could hear the thunder of Soviet artillery, a sound of approaching liberation that now seemed like a cruel joke. The SS were not going to let them be saved. Dr. Klodzinski, along with nearly 60,000 others, was herded out of the camp gates. They were forced into long, shuffling columns, marched west, away from the advancing Red Army. The Polish winter was at its most brutal. Snow covered the ground. A biting wind cut through their thin, striped uniforms. Most prisoners had only wooden clogs or worn-out shoes. Many were already suffering from malnutrition and disease. They were walking skeletons, forced on a desperate journey, with no food, no water, and no rest. The SS guards were merciless. They marched alongside the columns, rifles ready. Any prisoner who stumbled or fell out of line was shot on the spot. Their bodies were left in the snow on the side of the road, a gruesome trail marking the path of the march. For Dr. Klodzinski, this was a new kind of hell. The organized killing of the camp was now a mobile massacre. His medical knowledge was a torment. He understood exactly what was happening to the bodies around him. The stages of hypothermia, the effects of dehydration, the shutting down of organs. He did what little he could, advising men near him to eat snow to stay hydrated, telling them to huddle together for warmth when they stopped. But without medicine or shelter, his knowledge was almost useless. The days and nights blurred into a single, unending nightmare of walking. At night, they were herded into open fields or barns, sleeping in the freezing cold, huddled together like animals. Many never woke up. Klodzinski's survival depended on a combination of luck and sheer will. He was driven by the need to live, to bear witness. He had to survive to tell the world what he had seen, to ensure his secret diary would one day be read. But his journey into hell had one more stop. After days of marching, the survivors were loaded onto open-topped coal wagons, exposed to the freezing wind and snow. They were transported by train deeper into Germany. Many more died on this horrific journey. Klodzinski was eventually taken to Grossrosen, another concentration camp, and then on to others. He was now just one of thousands being shuffled around the collapsing Third Reich. His status as a doctor meant little now. The system was in chaos. He endured more weeks of starvation, brutality, and the constant threat of death. But he held on. He had survived the selections, the gas chambers, and Mengele. He had survived the death march from Auschwitz. He had to believe that liberation was close. He had to live so that the story of prisoner number 19808 would be told. Dr. Klodzinski was shuffled between several concentration camps. He was sent from Grossrosen to Buchenwald, and then to others. Each camp was a new circle of hell, overcrowded, starved, and riddled with disease. By the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was in its final death throes. The system of camps was collapsing into chaos. Food supplies stopped completely. Prisoners were dying of starvation in massive numbers. The SS guards became even more unpredictable. Some deserted their posts, trying to melt away. Others became even more brutal in the final days, conducting last-minute executions. For the prisoners, these last weeks were some of the most terrifying. Liberation was so close, they could almost taste it. But so was death. They could hear the constant sound of Allied artillery, getting closer every day. They knew the war was ending, but they didn't know if they would live to see it. Would the SS murder them all in a final act of spite? Or would the liberators arrive in time? It was a race against the clock. Klodzinski, emaciated and weak, focused on one thing: survival. He had come too far to die now. His secret diary, the record of Auschwitz's crimes, was no longer with him. He had been forced to leave his hidden documents behind, but he carried it all in his memory. The names, the dates, the faces of the victims, and the perpetrators. He was a living witness. His mind was the archive. Then, one day in April 1945, the guards vanished. The watchtowers were empty. The camp fell into an eerie, uncertain silence. The prisoners waited, terrified and hopeful. Suddenly, they heard the rumble of engines. Not the sound of SS trucks, but something different. The first Allied tanks rolled up to the camp's gates. American soldiers. They stared in horror at the walking skeletons who greeted them. The moment of liberation had finally come. For many prisoners, the sight was too much to comprehend. They wept, they cheered, they collapsed from exhaustion. Dr. Klodzinski felt a wave of overwhelming relief. He had survived. He was free. But his mission was only just beginning. The Allied medics were completely overwhelmed. They were faced with thousands of sick and dying people, victims of typhus, dysentery, and extreme malnutrition. Even in his weakened state, Dr. Klodzinski immediately went to work. He was a doctor again, not a prisoner. He helped the Allied medics identify diseases. He treated his fellow survivors, comforting them. His first acts in freedom were acts of healing, fulfilling the oath he had secretly honored for so long. He was liberated, but the horrors of Auschwitz never left him. He knew his work was not over. He had a promise to keep, a promise to the millions who did not survive. He had to ensure their stories were told, and that the monsters who committed these crimes would face justice. After the liberation, Dr. Klodzinski slowly began to recover his physical health. But he knew the psychological scars of Auschwitz would never leave him. He returned to his home city of Krakow. The city was free from Nazi occupation, but it was a city of ghosts, haunted by the memory of the millions who were lost. He was not the same man who had been taken away years earlier. He was a survivor, a witness carrying an immense burden. He immediately began his life's most important work, ensuring the crimes he had witnessed were not forgotten, and that the perpetrators would face justice. He made contact with the War Crimes Commissions, being established by the Allied powers. He provided his own detailed, first-hand testimony, recounting the horrors of the Krankenbau, the selections, the experiments, the names of the SS doctors. But he knew his testimony alone was not enough. He needed the physical proof he had risked his life to create. His secret diary. He worked with the Polish resistance and investigators, guiding them back to the ruins of Auschwitz, back to the rubble of Block 20, the infirmary. It was a desperate search, a hunt for scraps of paper, hidden in the walls and under the floorboards of the destroyed building. Miraculously, much of his documentation was recovered. The small, cramped notes detailing the Nazis' medical crimes. This diary was a bombshell, a meticulous, contemporaneous record of the atrocities. It became a crucial piece of evidence for the upcoming war crime tribunals. In 1946, the world's attention turned to Nuremberg, Germany. The Allies convened the doctors' trial, putting 23 high-ranking Nazi doctors and administrators on trial for their role in human experimentation and mass murder. Dr. Stanislav Klodzinski was called as a key witness for the prosecution. He traveled to Nuremberg to face the men who had been his captors. In the courtroom, he calmly and precisely gave his testimony. He spoke of the lethal injections, the frostbite experiments, and the selections. He described the actions of men like Friedrich Interess and provided evidence against the absent Joseph Mengele, who had escaped. His recovered diary gave his words undeniable power. It provided names, dates, and specifics that could not be refuted. His testimony, and that of other survivors, helped secure convictions, sending some of the Nazi doctors to the gallows. But his testimony was not the end of his mission. After the trials, Klodzinski returned to his medical career. He became a respected professor of medicine at his alma mater, the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. He could have tried to leave the past behind him, to forget the horrors and live a quiet life. But he refused. He dedicated the rest of his professional life to a new field of study: the psychological and medical effects of imprisonment in concentration camps. He interviewed hundreds of other survivors, documenting their physical and mental trauma. He became one of the world's leading experts on what was later called concentration camp syndrome. He was not just a witness anymore. He was a healer for the survivors and a guardian of their memory. Dr. Stanislav Klodzinski returned to a life of quiet dignity. But he never, for a single day, forgot what he had endured. He became a celebrated professor of medicine in Krakow, a respected healer and teacher. But his most important work was done as a guardian of memory. He dedicated his life to ensuring the victims of Auschwitz were not forgotten, and that the world understood the true nature of Nazi medical crimes. He published over 100 scientific articles on the subject, focusing on the long-term psychological and physical trauma of the survivors. He became the editor of a special medical journal, Przegląd Lekarski, Auschwitzem. It was an annual publication dedicated entirely to the medical history of Auschwitz. He gathered testimonies from other survivor doctors. He analyzed the recovered Nazi documents, and he cross-referenced them with his own secret diary, creating an undeniable, scholarly record of the genocide. His mission was to ensure these stories were never buried by time or denial. This channel shares that mission. We believe these dark truths must be heard. If you agree, please take a moment to subscribe now, so we can continue to bring these vital stories to light. Dr. Klodzinski's work was his way of honoring the dead. He sought to give them back the humanity that had been stolen from them. He lived a modest life, avoiding the spotlight. He rarely spoke of his own heroism. Instead, he always focused on the courage and suffering of others. He carried the weight of what he had seen every day: the faces of the men he couldn't save, the screams from the experimental blocks, the smoke from the crematoria. But he did not let the darkness consume him. He transformed his trauma into a powerful purpose. He continued to practice medicine, to teach students, and to write. He lived a full life, a life the Nazis had tried to steal from him. Dr. Stanislav Klodzinski, the man the SS tried to reduce to a number, died in 1990 at the age of 72. He left behind a legacy not of a victim, but of a quiet warrior. A doctor who, surrounded by death, chose to fight for life. A man who used his intellect as a weapon and his memory as a shield for the truth. His story is a testament to the power of one person to resist evil, even in the most hopeless of circumstances. It leaves us with a difficult question. In a place designed to destroy all humanity, what is the more powerful act of defiance? To die fighting or to live and bear witness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.